we only received 45 tissue samples to conduct microscopic analysis on. Of the 45 tissue samples, we found that only 2 of those 45 had actually been mutilated with a sharp instrument.
When they first started, they would send samples of these animals to the CBI, to Fort Collins, to try and determine what was the cause of their death, what was mutilating them. And 9 times out of 10 or more, the report would come back that were being caused by predators. Now, these ranchers and the sheriffs in these rural areas have been around cattle all their lives. They've been around coyotes all their lives. And they knew that this just wasn't possible. A coyote would not do that.
Predators, when they come in and start to eat, now I'm talking about 4-legged predators. They'll come in and they'll bite, and then they'll pull and they'll tear. The cuts we have, even we can't make cuts like this. We've tried this many times on dead animals with scalpels, razors, and knives, and we can't make the same cuts.
We've had cattle that we've went and investigated that were, you know, called in, and I think I have a mutilation here, and we went out and we seen it, and it was not a mutilation. And these are not the ones that's reported. The ones that we classed as a classic type mutilation are actually mutilations, and they're not predators.
Animals, wild animals, predators, coyotes, won't approach these carcasses. But in the case of an animal being mutilated in the wintertime, there's possibly something about the cold weather that may mask whatever it is that keeps predators away, and that will be the exception to the rule.
Is this animal here, is any pretty much like the other ones you had that was mutilated?
Yeah.
How old a cow is this, Don?
8 years old, according to the way I looked at her teeth, 8 or 9. I know definitely it wasn't animals.
We took out the whole works there. Don, you know now on this critter here, how this looks like a real incised wound?
Yeah.
Well, it looks, it's definitely cut.
Oh, yes.
And everything, you can tell that. I mean, even at the age that it is right now, that's opposed to the way it is to where the animals have been to it on this other side over here. Kind of noticed there, you know, the difference there, Don, between here and how animals have been to that, and that flesh is torn.
Yeah.
And it's not a real incise, but yet when we seen this animal the other day, now these were all incise, good clean cuts on them.
Definitely.
So that's a good example of what we was trying to say about the lab up there. They said that it was predators doing it, but that definitely wasn't a predator wound there.
No, I wouldn't say.
Well, it looks like they went clear from the navel here, clear back in underneath here, and took the whole bag and out of the whole works out, and they cored down into the rectum, the whole rectal area. It looks like it got back into some of the reproductive organs back in there.
As the mutilations and the sightings of the lights in the sky continued, it got to a point to where ranchers in the northeastern part of the state began arming themselves. They weren't getting the results they wanted from state authorities. They were concerned for their families, and they never knew when they might be next. They began patrolling their pasture land, watching over their herds at night. The lights from the sky, when they got too close to a herd of cattle, the ranchers shot.
Well, I think everybody was a little edgy. Everybody started carrying high-powered rifles. I don't know what good it would have done, but everybody was awfully nervous. I'm completely convinced that there's something there that's not normal. There's a lot of questions that are unanswered, I'm sure, and hopefully someday maybe somebody will figure it out.
Unidentifiable lights in the sky have appeared in virtually every area of this country which has been plagued by cattle mutilations. But no explanation has been found for these strange sightings. There are some who believe that these objects in the sky are responsible for thousands of mysterious cattle deaths which continue to this day. Though state and local officials have stated their views about the mutilation mystery, surprisingly few veterinarians will speak publicly about the situation. This man is an exception. Dr. William Fitzgerald runs an animal clinic in Durango, Colorado. Because of his expertise in the field of veterinary medicine, he was asked by the sheriff's office to perform an autopsy on a mutilated cow found in a remote area of state-owned forest.
This particular animal had been largely exsanguinated. The anus and about the first 4 inches of the rectum had been removed. The preputial skin and the last 2 or 3 inches of the penis had been severed flush with the body wall. The left eye had been removed, and the last 1/3 of the tongue had been cut. A portion of the lips on the left side of the animal were also sawed off, presumably to gain access to the tongue, but this makes no sense because that portion of the tongue could have been easily pulled out and cut off without that, so I don't understand that point. Reports I have heard, some that I have read subsequent to this time, indicate that people have seen mutilations that they attributed to predators. And if this was a predator, he had 2 feet and a 6-inch knife, because it was a very sharp single cut in most instances. And although not the world's leading expert, I work with knives frequently. I know what they do. I know the marks they leave.
Exsanguination, the removal of blood from an animal, has been a predominant trademark of the mutilators. Few officials have found an answer to the technique used in this procedure. Dr. Fitzgerald describes what he thinks is the method.
If a large bore needle is placed in the animal's jugular vein while the animal is sedated, under anesthesia, or awake if you like, somehow restrained, however, the animal's heart will function as a pump and will pump out very nearly all of its blood through that needle. As the animal's blood supply begins to diminish, a natural physiological mechanism takes over and sequesters or draws what remaining blood is left into the internal organs in the center to supply the vital organs, the liver, the heart, the brain. And it will leave the peripheral area, the skin, all of the non-vital centers, largely bloodless. So if you can successfully withdraw the major portion of an animal's blood, you can cut on that animal, and there will be virtually no bleeding at all from the surface. I know that I keep coming back to this point, but the animal was apparently restrained with something other than ropes. Why, I don't know. It was apparently washed completely clean. Why, I don't know. And it was in a very remote area. Perhaps these things tie together. Perhaps whoever, whatever, performed this didn't want to be observed. I think one of my initial feelings was that somebody certainly went to an awful lot of trouble to get back into a remote area where I don't believe you'd casually know there were even cattle to do all of this.
Dulce, New Mexico, similar to the plains of Colorado in its isolation, but nestled among rolling hills and small mountains, is the land of the Jicarilla Apache. Tradition is strong here. Indian women weave intricate baskets and create delicate beadwork. The men preside over tribal business and raise cattle. And here, as in Logan County, the night sky has been lit with the glow of unknown flying objects, and cattle are found mutilated. Officer Gabe Valdez of the New Mexico State Police and retired scientist Howard Burgess, who pioneered the development of Kirlian photography in this country, periodically pool their knowledge and expertise in an effort to solve the mutilation mystery. Officer Valdez describes how it all began.
It was in 1976, June the 14th, when we first had one of our cattle mutilations here in Dulce. the cattle that was mutilated belonged to Mr. Emmanuel Gomez. Any time that we do find one that it's not too decomposed and it's fresh enough for us to do some tests, well, I do call on Mr. Burgess because he has a lot of knowledge in the field of science that is very helpful to me in conducting my investigations.
Howard Burgess had a theory that some of the cattle had been marked prior to their mutilation with something which would show up under ultraviolet light but be invisible to the naked eye. Late one night, he and Valdez conducted an experiment and found that out of 80 head of cattle, 5 were indeed marked with a powdery white substance, visible only under ultraviolet light.
So we took ultraviolet with some special filters and ran the cattle through it, and what appears to be markings glowed under ultraviolet. It's invisible to the normal eye, but under ultraviolet it does glow. Then we removed the hair from the region that does glow, and we removed a control sample. We took these to the lab and had chemical checks run on them. We did find that the sample that did glow is extremely high in potassium and magnesium. At the time, this was interesting, but it didn't mean much to us until we ran on to other things that began to tie in with it.
The tie-in came on July 3rd, 1978, when a UFO was sighted over Taos, New Mexico. As it hovered over the town, it dropped a thin film of ashes onto the ground below. The ashes contained high levels of magnesium and potassium, the same elements found on the cattle under ultraviolet light, but there was more.
We find there's at least 25 elements in there. There's a good possibility that it may be something that's organic. And if it is, this just opens up a real bag of worms, because anything can happen if this is an organic material that has come from one of these crafts. And this, as the people told us, directly fell from the craft that was hovering over the area.
One evening in 1975, Logan County Sheriff Tex Graves took his deputies into the countryside around Serling, Colorado, determined to track the bright lights which had been skimming across the ranches and farmlands for the last several weeks. Reporter Bill Jackson describes the sequence of events.
We were just getting started in this. We really didn't know what we were doing. We weren't prepared for anything like this, of course. But as time went on, we realized we couldn't catch them, so maybe we can take pictures of them and discover something that way. About a year and a half later, the lights returned. The mutilations were still going on. So we arranged with the Honeywell people in Denver to borrow a 1100 millimeter Lentar lens from them. And got some high-speed recording film from Kodak. And then we sat and we waited, hoping that the lights would come back and we'd have a chance. And finally that chance came. It was a stationary object that we saw for approximately 30 to 45 minutes, and the resulting shots were interesting, to say the least. Shortly after these final exposures, the object just disappeared. It was almost like somebody hit a light switch and it was there no longer.
What are these unidentifiable lights? What is their nature and their purpose?
We only received 45 tissue samples to conduct microscopic analysis on. Of the 45 tissue samples, we found that only 2 of those 45 had actually been mutilated with a sharp instrument.
When they first started, they would send samples of these animals to the CBI, to Fort Collins, to try and determine what was the cause of their death, what was mutilating them.
Oh, yeah. How old a cow is this, Don?
8 years old, according to the way I looked at her teeth, 8 or 9. I know definitely it wasn't animals.
We took out the whole works there.
Don, you know, now on this critter here, classed as a classic type mutilation are actually mutilations, and they're not predators.
Animals, wild animals, predators, coyotes, won't approach these carcasses. But in the case of an animal being mutilated in the wintertime, there's possibly something about the cold weather that may mask whatever it is that keeps predators away, and that will be the exception to the rule.
Is this animal here, is any pretty much like the other ones you had that was mutilated?
Yeah.
And 9 times out of 10 or more, the report would come back that were being caused by predators. Now, these ranchers and the sheriffs in these rural areas have been around cattle all their lives. They've been around coyotes all their lives. And they knew that this just wasn't possible. A coyote would not do that.
Predators, when they come in and start to eat, now I'm talking about four-legged predators. They'll come in and they'll bite, and then they'll pull and they'll tear. The cuts we have, even we can't make cuts like this. We've tried this many times on dead animals with scalpels, razors, and knives, and we can't make the same cuts.
We've had cattle that we've went and investigated that were, you know, called in, and I think I have a mutilation here, and we went out and we seen it, and it was not a mutilation. And these are not the ones that's reported. The ones that we